This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created. To listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Scott Mautz, who is the CEO and founder of Profound Performance, a keynote, workshop, and training organization empowering business leaders to become better, more inspired versions of themselves. Scott is an award-winning best-selling author, a popular LinkedIn learning course instructor, and a faculty member at Indiana University's School of Business for Executive Education. His most recent book is The Mentally Strong Leader: Build the Habits to Productivity, Regulate Your Emotions, Thoughts, and Behaviors. Scott's unique combination of corporate experience, research, storytelling techniques, comedy, and dynamic delivery engages both hearts and minds. So, Scott, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today.
Thanks so much, Steve. I can't wait to meet that guy you just described. He sounds pretty cool. He
Well,
sounds
it's
cool.
so interesting because I've started doing shorter bios because the people I interview are so esteemed and so accomplished that you go on for minutes and minutes and minutes. So yours actually is longer than that, but that's the short version. So I hope that gives our listeners kind of an idea who you are. But having said that, why don't we just start with a little context? Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how you got to where you are, and just give us a little summary of your story.
Yeah, that sounds good, Steve. Glad to be here. I'll add a brief profile for your profiles in leadership. So, I
Perfect.
grew up in the corporate world. I spent, first of all, I should say, as a human being, I grew up in central New York, upstate New York, and I became interested very early on in leadership in my career. And I grew up in the corporate world. The first venture in my life was in mortgage investment banking, and then when I got out of school, I was really interested in marketing and leadership, and so signed on with Procter and Gamble, which is a kind of a leadership factory in many ways. There's a few companies that produce future CEOs elsewhere more than Procter and Gamble does. So I grew up in that world for 2.5 decades, and really started paying attention early, Steve, in my career to what discerns a good leader versus a great leader, a leader who just happens to be in a management position versus one who feels like they're almost born to be in that position. And I really started studying that a long time ago, and actually wrote my first book when I was still in the corporate world, and discovered that, okay, I guess I'm not the worst speaker in the world and the worst writer in the world. Maybe I can make a go of this. And I really enjoyed it. And not too long after that, I left the corporate world. And this was going on about 9 years ago. And since then, I've been speaking full time and doing workshops and training and keynotes and writing more books,
Yeah.
teaching courses on LinkedIn Learning since then, and really just following kind of my dream and my passion to make a bigger difference on a broader platform with the written and the spoken word.
Yeah, that's great. And I see just off to your right shoulder there is your book on display there, and here it is. Great book, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So, um, so just tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, I got to say, when you get a recommendation in your book from Daniel Pink, you got to be doing something right. So, how did that come about? You must have had somebody that knew him, or did you know him, or?
Oh yeah, no, I've known him for a while. He's been a fan of my work, and I a fan of his
Yeah,
work. And he was one of the people that originally inspired me when I first started writing, Steve, because he writes with such depth of research and insight that I knew that that's the kind of writer I wanted to be. I wanted to
yeah.
bring some profoundness to my writing and some pragmatic, practical tools and takeaways and frameworks. That's how Dan Pink writes, and so I really started following him and got to know him, years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a great writer. And I will tell you, he's been a past guest on this podcast as well.
Ah,
So
fantastic,
I
yeah.
did him a few years back, and we have a common thread in the sense we're both Northwestern University graduates. So he was gracious to do the interview for me. So that was awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the book now. Mentally strong leaders. You talk about in the book that are skilled at regulating how they emote, how they think, and how they act. And so tell us a little bit about that and how you think emotions come into that.
Yeah, I think, most importantly, Steve, I like to start by telling people that, mental strength is broader than EQ, emotional intelligence. A lot of people assume that the terms are interchangeable, and they're not. EQ, of course, is the ability to get your emotions to work for you versus against you. And, you know, you can tell me if you agree or not, but the term that has probably dominated most of leadership buzzwordiness the last decade is probably EQ.
Yeah.
You're living under a rock if you haven't heard of it. And it's EQ is just a slice of the broader umbrella of mental strength, which, as you had mentioned, mental strength is the ability to productively regulate not only your emotions, but your thoughts and your behaviors too, no matter the circumstances, even in adversity. And I would argue, especially in times of adversity, as I like to shorthand it, Steve, it's how we manage internally so that we can lead better externally at
Hmm.
work and in life.
Yeah, yeah. I can remember as a young CEO myself, coming home one day and telling my wife, I said, "Man, I am driving myself crazy because I keep thinking if we just get to here and if we just get this and if I can just get to there and we get and it never stops and you just you can be living that narrative forever and just be frustrated the whole time, or you can identify it and decide what it is and move on.
Yeah, that's right. And here's the thing, I think most of us intuitively understand that if you want to succeed at work and in life, Steve, you have to be able to self-regulate your emotions and your thoughts and your behaviors. You have to. But this just in, an exclusive for for your podcast, it's really hard to do that. Really,
Yeah.
really hard to do that. And when you step back, mental strength consists of six core mental muscles: fortitude, boldness, confidence, decision making, goal focus, and messaging. The ability as a leader to stay positive in your messaging to the troops, even in the face of negativity. And these six core mental muscles, what they have in common, you could say, well, why those six mental muscles? Why not other things? Because they all involve, there's a common thread that runs through, they all require self regulation to be good at them. And that is really, really hard. It's really hard to regulate and remain confident. It's hard to regulate and stay bold and willing to take risks and to stay focused on your goals and to be decisive. Those are all really, really hard things to do, but they pay tremendous dividends. And if I may, Steve, I'd like to just share one study I conducted
Hmm.
to demonstrate what I'm talking about. I've done this study multiple times now. I think I'm up to 5 times now. But I conduct this study where I ask 3,000 executives at a time a simple question. Thinking of the highest achieving organizations that you've ever been a part of, that overcame the most obstacles, what were the attributes of those key leaders at that time? And every time I ask this, Steve, 90 to 91% of respondents describe the same type of leader, a mentally strong leader. They describe the six mental muscles in action. Oh, well, that leader, we got through adversity and achieved a ton because of their fortitude, their confidence, their boldness, their goal focus. And I keep hearing these six same mental muscles coming up over and over again. And here's the cool part. Even though they may not describe, open book, they may not describe them as the term, mentally strong. When I then put a pick list in front of 3,000 executives at a time and say, okay, now, thinking of the person you just described to me and all those attributes, I want you from the pick list to pick which term best describes them now. And then I give them a pick list of over 50, 60 items on it. And one of those items is mentally strong. And around 95% of the time, people circle in a pick list of 50 to 60 choices the term mentally strong. And what that tells me, Steve, is I think we've come across the term that really encapsulates how we've been trying to describe for years the type of leader that helps us get through adversity to achieve. And that is mentally strong. It's what makes me think, mental strength is the leadership superpower of our times. I believe it is. And I believe it is the next EQ because it's broader than EQ. You're going to be hearing about it for the next 10 years, guaranteed. And your listeners are on the front edge of that now.
Yeah, that's awesome. That makes a lot of sense. In the beginning of the book, you also kind of open up with a story, and since we're right in the middle of the summer games, the Paris summer games, and
Yeah.
this will probably be released after they're over, but at least you and I are talking right during this. You bring up this amazing story. It's a very
Yeah.
counterintuitive research finding
Yeah.
that with Olympians that that just say something that a lot of us wouldn't think to be true. So share that story with us and just tell us what you found with that.
Yeah, it was a fascinating study that was conducted. And I'll just ask you to play along, Steve, here for the sake of the listener.
Okay.
Let's pretend, congratulations, you're an Olympic athlete, and pick whatever sport that you would fantasize about being really, really great at. And forget that you read the book for a second. Let me ask you this question. So, if you were given the choice, Steve, would you rather be known as a gold medal winner in your sport or a silver medal winner in your sport? I'm giving you the choice. What do you pick?
Oh, I got to go gold, of course.
Everybody would say gold, duh, right?
Yeah.
But this fascinating study from the University of Virginia showed something incredibly counterintuitive. They conducted the study with over 650 track and field athletes, and they tracked their life over the course of over 50 years. And in that set, they also had gold medal winners in track and field and silver medal winners in track and field. And check this out. The silver medal winners were actually proven to be more successful in life, to have overcome, more obstacles in their life, which we'll get to in a second, but actually make more money, have better careers, and even live longer lives. And that's because they have overcome more obstacles. And I'll give you an example just to help, show this. In 2014, the United States women's hockey team was in the gold medal match against Canada. And they were dominating them in the game. It was 2-0 with about 3 minutes left. And then in those last couple of minutes, the Canadian team scored 2 goals quickly, then went on in overtime to score another goal, defeating the women's team. And pundits who afterwards would say, well, hold on a minute, the U.S. women's team didn't win the silver, they lost the gold. And, afterwards there was even a meme, a viral meme of the picture of them on the medal stand afterwards, known as Silver Medal Face. They all looked incredibly dejected.
Yeah.
And it's just a way to show that, what the University of Virginia study showed that, when we overcome obstacles in our lives, and, when you talk to Olympic athletes, and separate studies show that Olympic athletes don't go to the Olympics thinking that they can't win the gold. It's the nature of who they are. So if they don't win, anything that got in their way is a setback. Sometimes it's a traumatic setback, like losing it in the last 2 minutes of something they've been training for 4 years. But it also shows that our ability to overcome those kind of setbacks over time ultimately produces a more successful human being. And that's just the fortitude element of mental strength. Imagine if not only do you have fortitude, but you're also bold in life and you're confident and you're goal focused, you can make decisions and you positively message to the troops. So it was a really interesting way, and I opened the book, The Mentally Strong Leader, with that story to show that
Yeah.
the power here of mental strength is beyond maybe your wildest imagination.
Yeah, it's almost like sometimes as parents or leaders, we think if someone hasn't struggled enough, if it's come too easy or it's been handed to them or whatever, that maybe they don't reach a high enough level because, as you say, it kind of takes that failure or that loss to kind of kick you into the next higher gear.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and I think it just makes intuitive sense, too, Steve. Although we forget, it's easy to forget, though, isn't it? Sometimes when we're in the face of a really tough period in our life, we're facing a lot of setbacks. We can, forget to think about the agreeable adversity, the things that we're actually learning, the things that are actually going to benefit us over the long haul. And, that's a key element of mental strength, being able to draw on fortitude and resilience in the times when we most need it to. And Steve, tell me if you agree with this. I would argue that in a world where, and I say this with no political affiliation whatsoever, I think this is true that um, we live in a world where it's hard to even agree on the facts today,
Yeah,
period, over and out.
absolutely.
And given that, we also live in a world with more and more opportunity for distraction. We live in more, opportunity for more and more sparks of self-doubt to surface, more and more setbacks, to appear each and every day as we work in a more complex environment. I would argue the need for mental strength is only going to continue to increase, which is why I really do believe it's the self-leadership superpower of our times, and it is the next EQ, only it's going to be twice as big.
Yeah, and in relation to that, you also talk about how, self-regulation in a leader,
Yeah.
is very important. So, expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's it makes a lot of sense, and I'll give you an example of that. One of the mental muscles that I talk about in the book, of course, of the six mental muscles that I talk about, is the ability to build confidence, right? And it's very hard to self-regulate your confidence. Steve, think about yourself in your own life. Heck, you used to be a CEO. You strike me as just a probably a naturally pretty confident guy. You have to be to ascend to that level in an organization. But I'm sure you have your days too, where something might not go right. Whether it's a spouse, a partner, a child, a cousin, an uncle, whoever, and
Mhm.
something happens, and you kind of take a step back, and it's hard to maintain that confidence. And it's easy to happen with confidence, especially because we forget that confidence is not. It is not not the absence of doubt. Confidence is your ability to manage your relationship with doubt. And we all have that relationship with doubt. Even
Mhm.
I've interviewed thousands of people for the mentally strong leader, and even the most confident people, Steve, would not tell me that they never, excuse me, experienced self doubt. And
Yeah.
we forget that, and it's hard to self regulate that.
Yeah, and it's that, we've heard it a million times. You talk about a word that's used a lot, but it's the it's the imposter syndrome piece, where even the most confident person in the world is sometimes thinking, "Oh my gosh, maybe I, maybe I'm not as good at this or whatever." So yeah, you're right. We all go through that.
Yeah, and I have a lot of tools in the book, The Mentally Strong Leader. They're based on habit building science, which I'll talk about later. But because you mentioned imposter syndrome, it's one of the things that I talk about. In a couple of steps that I think that are important to mention here, because imposter syndrome is growing in leaps and bounds, especially amongst women. Women suffer from imposter syndrome disproportionately relative to men, depending on the study that you follow, Steve. There's estimates from anywhere between 60 to 85% of us will experience some severe form of imposter syndrome in our life. And just a couple of thoughts on overcoming that. First of all, you have to do the obvious, which is you have to be willing to own your accomplishments, first and foremost.
Hmm.
You have to be able to ask yourself, where am I assigning too much credit or luck to other external factors? What simply would not have happened without, my unique talents? What am I not giving myself enough credit for? You have to start there. And especially with women, I found it very, very helpful, because I coach quite a few people with imposter syndrome, Stephen. So I'll do this. I'll say, okay, it just happened not so long ago. I was coaching a woman who had just got promoted into a role. And by the way, this also works with men. Again, I'm just sharing this because statistically speaking, we know that it happens more often with women. So I'm sharing an example with women and a female client that I had that she had just got promoted into a new role. And so I simply asked her, and this is a trick you can try on yourself or if you're coaching someone through imposter syndrome. And I asked her, okay, so why don't you tell me how you got to where you are today? And then she starts to list off the reasons. Oh, well, I had a mentor that got me in this role. Oh, well, I got lucky, to be honest with you. Someone else was a lead candidate, and their husband had to move, so they went with it. Oh, it's just the right place, the right time. And what happens is almost invariably, they start to list external sources of reasons why, and then I'll say, okay, great. Those are the external reasons why you got to where you are now. Now tell me the internal reasons. And you force them to really focus on, let them get all that out of their system, all the helps that they got. Now I want you to own uniquely the value that you bring to the table. And, that's kind of step one. Even then, some people will say, yeah, okay, I got it, but I still feel like an imposter. You go to the next step, for me, which is you have to be open to imposter discomfort, but closed to imposter thoughts. And here's what I mean by that. So I would, in this case of this woman, I'll continue to use this example to show you what I'm talking about. I would tell her, look, you have doubts about you being in this new promoted role. I get that. That's very natural. Let that doubt sit there. Let it sit there, and that's okay. Because letting it just sit there allows you to focus not if you can do the job, but how you're going to do the job. So let it sit there because it's okay. But at the same time, while the discomfort is in the background and you're okay with that and living with that, be closed to imposter thoughts, which is very different. That's when those little snipe marks come in from yourself internally. I knew I couldn't do this job. People are going to find out I'm a fraud. You have to think of those thoughts as coming external to you, almost like they're in a cartoon bubble. Psychologists have a term for this, but I like to just tell people to just don't give in to that, because you think about it as a critic, an unhelpful critic that just wants to criticize you, and so their comments are going to help you live the life that you want to lead. So why would you listen to them?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other steps to get to imposter syndrome, but I wanted to share some of those because you brought it
Yeah.
up, and it's such a key part of
No,
what crumbles people's confidence.
no, that's very helpful. And I also think too that culturally, so we hear a lot about, a good leader is a humble leader as well.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I had a leader mentor tell me once that, being overly humble is actually worse than being arrogant. I
Yeah.
thought that was pretty funny, because sometimes you can just take it too far. It's like, oh no, I didn't, it wasn't me. I had nothing to do with it. It's all about this, all, and people see through that too. I mean, you got to own it a bit.
Yeah, that's true. And Steve, wouldn't you say as a CEO, weren't there times when you were thinking, let's say, let's just say, I'm going to make this up, Steve, okay? Let's say that I led an important division for your company, okay? There were probably times when you wanted to know that I know what I'm doing. You
Yeah.
wanted to know that I made XYZ happen, not just my team, right? Is that true statement?
Oh, absolutely. Sure.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so we see that a lot in our research, that sometimes people who, especially, they want to be servant leaders, and servant leadership is a good thing until it's not, until you put your organization so often in the forefront, and you forget that sometimes the leader needs you to be at the front of the pack. They want to know that you know the details. They
Right.
want to
Right.
know that the impact that you're having, and not just holding up your organization all the time. So yeah, sometimes humility can work against us. You just have to find that balance.
And I think that, people are smart. So, they know when when you're dealing with a credit grabber, oh,
Yeah.
because I did this and I did that, and then, people can see through that. But at times, you just it's okay to own what you did and be proud of it and not poo-poo it,
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
yeah.
Steve, is there anything more transparent than when someone's not being transparent?
Yeah, that's right.
we're,
That's
we're a
right.
smart species, so
Oh
if you're
yeah.
being falsely humble, if you're humble bragging, people are going to spot it a mile away.
Yeah, for sure. In your book, you also, you dedicate the chapters to each of the six tests,
Yeah,
that you defined earlier, and
test of
then
leadership.
you have a system of to enable them. So I thought that was an interesting approach. And so, tell us a little bit by why you picked the word enable them.
Yeah, so a couple of things. We should probably start with this. I think it's helpful, Steve, to equate for a second. In the book, I call these, the six mental muscles of mental strength, right? Fortitude, confidence, boldness, decision making, goal focus, and messaging. I think, first of all, to get to your question, I think it's helpful to equate those mental muscles to physical muscles. And think about how you enable your physical muscles for a second, right? You
Yeah.
go to the gym and you exercise them and you work on them And you understand what muscles you want to work on and which ones you want to maintain, which ones you're already pretty naturally good at and strong at, and which ones are dropping off. And guess what happens if you stop, even if you're a bodybuilder and you stop going to the gym, what happens? You're no longer enabling your physical strength. It starts to drop off. Your muscles turn to fat. It's the same thing with mental muscles. If you don't exercise them over time, if you don't have a mental strength training regimen that you can return to over and over and over again, those muscles will become flabby. You will become weaker over time. So to
Yeah.
enable them, it requires really two core things, Steve. You have to start with understanding what is your current level of mental strength. And in the book, The Mentally Strong Leader, I have chapter 2 is all about the mental strength self-assessment.
Hmm.
It's 50 questions that you take that are very quiet, introspective questions. It takes you about 15 minutes to do it. All I ask is that as a reader is that you're honest and you're vulnerable in answering those questions. And after that 15 minutes, it produces a mental strength score. And you fall within one of 4 tiers of mental strength. And then it also gives you a score by mental muscle. What's your fortitude score, confidence score, boldness score, etc. And what that allows you to do, Steve, is you discern what muscles you need to enable. What ones do you really need to strengthen? Which ones are like, wow, pretty good? Like, for example, I'm, more focused on goals and getting, to the completion of them than I thought I was. So I just want to maintain that muscle. But I really see I have a lot of work to do in strengthening my confidence muscle. And so you create your own customized plan to enable mental strength. Part one.
Yeah.
Part two is because you remember I said, Steve, that this isn't easy. Like your listeners know that self-regulation is key to succeed. We know that. And yet, why is it so hard? Well, to help that, the arm around you are habits. And the book is based on habit building science. And if you think about it, Steve, habits are repetitions.
Yeah.
They're systems and frameworks that you put in place to help you get your reps in, just like your reps at the gym when you're lifting weights, right? And the over 50 plus tools in the book enable you to become mentally stronger because they are systems and frameworks to help you build that habit, even to help you take the first small step to build that habit, to help you to figure out what to do in moments of weakness when you can feel your confidence spiraling down after a bad meeting with the CEO. How do you recover in that specific moment? So yeah, you really have to be able to, I chose that word carefully. You have to be able to enable those muscles. Starts by knowing what your baseline is and mental strength, which you can do by taking the assessment, and then enabling them by engaging in the habit building tools in the book, right? Does that make sense, Steve?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's just, you were talking about emotion and, um, again, I'll just use myself as an example. I can be an emotional guy. And so when I've been in front of a big group and I talk about something very touching and, get a little teary eyed, even cry, after that episode, I come down off the stage or out of the meeting and I was like, gosh, dang it, I should not. So mad at myself for letting that go, but most people will say, no, no, that really made the point. That was, so maybe not even understanding
Yeah.
how that emotion, I mean, nobody wants somebody up there bawling uncontrollably because that's uncomfortable. But nobody wants somebody up there totally stone faced either. So sometimes, understanding what is effective, and I'm not suggesting that you cry on purpose, but if your emotion does get the best of you, it's not necessarily, a knife to the heart. So,
Yeah, because it's, Steve, you've been a leader a long time, and let's say you worked in somebody else's company. I mean, who would you rather see on stage? A leader who told you, "I have all the answers, guaranteed, just follow me," or a leader who said, "Look, I believe in where we're going. I don't have
yeah,
everything figured out, but we're going to figure out the rest together." It,
yeah, yeah.
it's not even close, right? You're going to go with the one that's vulnerable because we can all see ourselves in a leader that is willing to show up as themselves and can reflect emotions and behaviors and thoughts that we also experience. It paints you as more human. It shows you stronger, not weaker, because you were
Yeah.
willing to be vulnerable.
And as we want to be as prepared as absolutely possible. Sometimes things happen that we're not sure of, and I love your story in the book too about when you say, "Hey, I'm gonna be a keynote speaker now," and the pandemic hit, so that had to change your business strategy wildly, I would think.
Yeah, yeah, it did. It certainly forces you to rethink it. But my story, like so many stories, was the extent to which I was able to come back stronger than ever. What I can honestly say is that, um, professionally, what I went through with the pandemic of, experience, when you have a guy whose business model is based on live events and
Yeah,
live events evaporate, you have to adapt. You have to be able to thrive, not just survive. And like many setbacks in our life, Steve, it just made me stronger. It broadened my portfolio of offerings. So, I broadcast now from a professional studio, as you can see here, and I do virtual keynotes now, and I do virtual workshops and trainings, and it expanded my menu because it forced me to. And like many setbacks in life, right? If we choose to view them that way, it can actually make us far, far stronger.
yeah, yeah. You saw that, we all have our stories and we all saw how people did it. I thought it was really interesting too in the music industry how, people just created ways to, still get their music out there and still, as you said, do performances virtually or whatever. And yeah, I think it opens up some doors that we maybe really didn't think about. And now that we're forced to think outside the box, good things can happen.
Yeah, not only does adversity cut off some paths for us, which can feel painful in the moment, sometimes that's a good thing, right? The old when a
Yeah.
door closes, a window can open. And I found, Steve, tell me if this is true, if you agree with this. Sometimes you can't see those windows until the door is closed.
Yeah.
And adversity helps that. It helps provide a clarity of vision and perspective that you can't always get it. It's why I believe so strongly in finding the agreeable adversity. What about that
Right.
setback you're going through is truly positive that you can learn from, that can open up new windows for you.
Well, and it's easy to kind of go back to what's always worked or what's always been your go-to, and when that is not available, then you have to think outside the box or you're dead,
Yeah,
So yeah,
that's exactly right.
and talk. I think this runs into the same thing we're just talking about, but talk to us a little bit because you described the difference in the book too about reacting versus responding to adversity.
Yeah, it's, you really do have a choice. And, the way I like to think about it here is, you, if in the face of a setback, you can react or respond. And they're two very different ways forward there, right? So if you react, that means you're letting your emotions translate immediately into your actions, right? And I'm not talking here, Steve, about minimizing emotions. I'm talking about managing your emotions. That old adage of check your emotions at the door, it's garbage. It just
Totally
doesn't.
agree. Totally
It
agree.
doesn't work. What
Yeah.
I advocate, and science has proven this to be effective over time, Steve, is react internally, but respond externally. Do not allow the reaction to convert directly into your response. Take that moment to take a deep breath, to process, to figure out how to move forward. And
Mhm.
don't allow that reaction to translate directly into a response. And, when we fail to do that, it can show up in a lot of different ways, not only in the moment, but over a long time. And I see it all the time. I ask to come in and talk to organizations that are struggling in times of adversity. And I'll start interviewing the leaders and the employees, and I'll see that there's a very reactive culture. They feel like what's happening to them isn't fair. They're stuck in it's not fair. They're catastrophizing what's really happening to them. They're playing the victim mentality. They're allowing their emotions, their reactions internally to translate over into their actions externally, not only in the moment, but over time. And the organizations that are much better at dealing with adversity, they understand that initial reaction and the reaction they can have as a company, as a team, as an individual to a setback. But they allow that to sit there. They allow it to process it. They understand that's their internal reaction. But then they're careful in how they respond in a more thoughtful way with space and distance between them and their emotions about what has happened to them in the setback.
Yeah, and I think too you have to I think you said it in the book as well, anticipate resistance or
Yes.
realize that, it's not going to be perfect. And one of my favorite business books, it's not you don't see it on the top list, but I just love it. It was a book called Yes to the Mess, and it was written by Frank Barrett. And
Yeah.
Frank is a jazz pianist. And he talks about, running a business much like being in a jazz band, where, you're playing along and then somebody goes off on a solo and you allow them to do that solo because that's kind of but you have to follow them and you have to go and you never quite exactly know what you're doing. But when it all comes together, then in a jazz band, that's called hitting the groove. And when you're in the groove, it's just awesome. But you just have to anticipate that groove is going to change and you got to be ready for it and you got to go with it. And I love the book because basically he's saying don't try and make everything perfect because you know what? It's chaotic, it's messy, and you just have to learn to respond to what comes at you, as you just said.
That's right. Psychologists call that, achieving a state of flow. And
Yeah.
if you're not able to flow with the rhythms of the business and the rhythms of the setbacks, you're going to have a hard time surviving and, let alone thriving in business and in life.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. You also talk about difficult conversations, and
Yeah.
you know, probably one of that's what I hear the most with clients a lot of times is, how do I deal with these difficult conversations? And so, there's all kinds of strategies, but I think you said it simply at one point where it's just, you got to define what the tension is.
Yeah.
And I've heard it too, where it's kind of like you have to go back to the point where you both can agree before you go forward. Because if if we're having a difficult conversation and my strategy to convince you I'm right is just to keep piling on more and more information, it doesn't help because we didn't agree back here what the basic fact was. So, I think maybe we're talking about similar things. So, discuss that a little bit in your opinion.
Yeah, that's right. I really have found, in the book, I talk a lot because same thing with me, Steve. I get asked so much about, not only, not only how do I conduct a difficult conversation, how do I prepare for one? And I go into that a lot because that's a key part of mental strength. That's a different brand of fortitude. It is really hard to have a hard conversation, Steve, right? There's a reason
Yeah.
why many of us don't have them. And, I've been thinking about this for a long time and studying this for a long time. I can tell you with great assurance that part of the key to preparing for a difficult conversation is that you really do have to understand what is the source of tension you're expecting? What will make that conversation difficult? And it could be a variety of things. It could be that you expect the person to be emotional. It could be that it's a relationship that you either treasure or that is a very difficult one. It could be you're just not familiar with having difficult discussions. And what the source is has a big impact on how to prepare. And I'll give you an example from the book. So, for example, people forget how much power structure can play into a difficult conversation and add to the source of tension. So, for example, let's say, Steve, that you and I are going to have a discussion, and you're a CEO still, okay? And I work in your company, and let's say I want to have a tough discussion with you about I'm making this up, some I don't know, some decisions you made that I don't agree with, or some feedback that I want to give you, whatever it is, right? Now, in this power structure, there's three things that can happen in any power structure. The person you're going to have that discussion with can have more power than you, less power than you, or the same amount of power as you. Now, if the person has more power than you, more than likely, the problem with that can be you're going to be way too deferential. You're going to just say, okay, they have more power than me, they're in control, I'm not really going to speak my mind. If they have less power than you might be worried in preparing for that discussion that you're going to crush their spirit, that in having that difficult discussion, that you're going to do more damage than you're going to help. If they have equal power to you may be worried that they don't even really have to listen to me because I'm just a peer. So I might push this too hard and really, press my advantage and that becomes a disadvantage. So in our example with you, I say, okay, look, Steve has more power than me. He's the CEO. That's the nature of this power structure. I report to him. What I'm going to do, though, because I can't do anything about that dynamic, Steve, the power structure, what I can do is change my patterns. And my pattern when I engage with you, Steve, is I always defer. I never say what's really on my mind. I get intimidated by your title. I don't share nuggets that I think you could really benefit from. So going into that discussion, that difficult discussion, I commit to changing my pattern. That is just one example of how understanding the source of tension in difficult conversations can help you prepare better for them, right? Does that
Yeah.
make better sense? And I can't imagine
Yeah.
having any of that kind of feedback for you as a CEO. Steve, I'm sure you were 100% perfect.
Oh yeah, yeah, right, right. Well, and I'm a huge believer in language too, and I do think a very simple technique that works really well is to ask somebody, you know, are you open to a suggestion, or
Yes,
can I
yes,
share my true feelings, or can I really, and I've never heard anyone say no.
yes.
They always give you permission. So then
That's right.
by giving permission, I think there's a little better hope that they may actually be listening.
I think that's right. And you know, even if they say, you know, yes, but it's, with hesitation, what has happened is now they've invited you in, and that gives you some leeway to
Right.
proceed with caution. So yeah,
Right.
I totally agree with you, Steve.
Absolutely. Talk a little bit about the palms up exercise.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that was interesting to me, so I'd like to hear your explanation of it.
yeah. So, well, let me ask you this question, Steve. Do you do you ever lose your temper?
Oh yeah, oh
Te-
yeah,
I'm going to try to apply this to you. So, if you could just for a second humor me and take a second to describe a situation to me where you were really struggling to keep your cool in front of the troops, where you really wanted to blow your top, but you kind of stepped back, you thought about it, and you didn't let that get the better of you. Can you? And I'm going to use you as an example. Can you describe that to me if you'd be willing to?
sure. Well, as a healthcare provider, in my past, you learn how to uh, control things in a way. So biologically, I guess I would say, and then so I would do it by, breathing in through your nose to stimulate your parasympathetic nervous
Yes,
system, as
yes,
opposed to, it's one way to do it. But an example might be, um, if somebody were to say to me, like, well, you just don't care about people, or you just don't care about this or something, that triggers me, so that would be an example. If someone approached me or attacked me like that, I would probably lose my temper, or at least get triggered for sure.
yeah. And you used the key word, and thank you for sharing that, Steve. So now I can talk about the Palms exercise and the mentally strong leader. It's part of how to message positively to the troops, because we all know what happens when a leader really loses their cool. The troops will remember that, and it probably isn't a good thing that they do. So in
Mhm.
your case, you used a key word, which is trigger. Just like and I didn't know you were going to say that word. I was hoping that you would, because when you're triggered, it should trigger something in you to prevent yourself from losing your cool, which is called
Yeah.
the palms exercise. And I have clients that have actually, um, had a tattoo made, and on the tips of their fingers, they actually have had tiny letters to spell out PALMS on their fingers. One in particular has a real temper problem. In palms, it's first of all symbolic for, like, palms up as a symbol of peace. It's very
Mhm.
hard to really blow your cool at somebody if you were to talk to them like this, right? But palms is also an acronym to remember some simple steps that you can take to really keep from blowing your cool as a leader. I'll go through each of them very quickly. P is just about, project. Just in the moment say, what image am I about to project by losing my cool? I guarantee you it's never a good one. Imagine that you're on camera, you're on film, you're about to lose it. What are people going to take away from that? What are you projecting? The A is all about accepting and just saying, okay, am I really just not accepting a different point of view here? Right? Am I viewing someone as difficult when all they really are is different? What's your acceptance level? You can quickly go to L, and you don't have to do all of these in order. Any one of them can help, but L is just for a laugh. It's so hard to be mad at somebody when you're laughing. One of my favorite quotes of all time is by a comedian who said the shortest distance between two people is laughter. And you
Mhm.
just have to ask, can I find humor in this moment rather than blowing up at people? You can go to the M, which stands for measure, which is just quickly measure the reaction you're about to give. Pause yourself and say, will my reaction be proportional to the offense at hand? And quite often, we overreact. And then the S in Palms is really just to separate, separating the person from the point. Conflict, and we lose our temper a lot in it because of the underlying relationship. We have a poor relationship with a person, and we're assigning what they say and taking it personally. And you get a chance to just separate the person from the point when you remember the S in Palms. So by no means do I expect, Steve, everyone to go PALMS one in row after the other.
Mhm.
Most of my clients have just one or two of those that can really help them to keep their cool when things get really, really nasty.
Yeah, and I just think too, along those same lines, is when you get triggered, as we mentioned, that if you can just identify why you're triggered, that usually takes about 50% of it off the table right away. Just say, okay, this is why I'm that guy struck a nerve or whatever. And then the other point I think you said that has always resonated with me. I think Dick Knight said it once from Nike, and he says, "I've been told my whole life that people say, 'Hey, it's not personal; it's just business.'" And he says, "BS. It's always personal." You just have to know how to deal with it. It's you can't remove the personal from it. So it's just something that you have to deal with.
That's right.
You also talk about, which I really liked, in this messaging is the window of transparency. Because I do think that people will give you a lot of leeway and let you go a lot further if it's kind of the why, if they understand the why, if they understand the transparency, what's going on, as opposed to just blindly leading, or blindly following what you say, needs to happen.
Yeah, it's a powerful tool. Let me ask you, Steve, as you know, as a CEO, you had plenty of opportunities to be transparent, right?
Yep.
Not all windows are created equal, though. And actually, there's sometimes you actually shouldn't engage in those
Right.
windows. And so I have a tool in the mentally strong leader that I call the window of transparency that just describes, one of the times where it really makes sense. Where does mental strength show up when you're being transparent? And I jokingly said before that nothing's more transparent when someone's not being transparent, and that's true. And the way to show up is you be transparent about why you made a decision. Be transparent with people on where they stand in their career. Be transparent with information that you share. Treat it as a strategy. Sharing information takes a lot of work. Being transparent with it is a turbocharger for your organization. Be transparent about your shortfalls. Be transparent about your agendas because hidden agendas rarely remain as such. So I outlined the very specific strategies and ways to show up as transparent in a leader in ways that are going to be the most meaningful to your organization.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's a really good, and I can remember probably the most frustrating things that I had to deal with was when you wanted to be transparent, but as you said, you can't always be transparent. Like maybe you had to let go of a loved employee, and there was a reason for it, but you couldn't share the reason. So once sometimes, and hopefully you've done the work before this, so they'll take it, is sometimes you just have to say, you just have to trust me on this. I can't give you the detail. I can't give you exactly all the circumstances. You just have to trust me. And
Yeah.
and that'll work sometimes too if you don't use it all the time, right?
That's right, Steve. And here's what happens when you do that. And I'm sure you experience this as a CEO, you buy the right to not be transparent or to withhold information in certain occasions by showing that you're transparent and proactively sharing information, being clear with people on where they stand, telling why you made a decision. You show that you value the spirit and the value of transparency. And that earns you the right that people are going to understand in those times, even if they quote unquote catch you in not being transparent, they're going to understand there's a reason behind it. I just had a client who, it would not have been a good idea for him to be transparent about the fact that the company was reorganizing and that there were going to be layoffs. He hadn't had time yet to put together, but that would not have been a good time to be transparent. But when it came time for him to make that announcement, he had earned the right because he had used so many of the strategies in a tool I call the window of transparency for the mentally strong leader to be able to do that.
Yeah, yeah. And in the book too, each chapter, that you have, then you have a guide that kind of suggests the steps, and in each of those habits, and they start with your first small steps, which is
Yeah.
very practical, and then it goes into in a moment of weakness, which I think are good practical things that you can say, okay, if I'm in this situation or I'm experiencing this thing, here's something I can do, as opposed to just being unsure where to go.
Yeah, that's straight from habit building science, and the subtitle of the book, The Mentally Strong Leader, is Build the Habits to Productively Regulate Your Emotions, Thoughts, and Behaviors. And habit building science, the core of it, again, I was saying earlier, it has to do with repetitions and systems and frameworks. But habits never get formed, Steve, if you don't know the first small step to take. And that's frankly one of the biggest reasons why we don't create the small changes in our life that we want to, because we don't really know where to start, and or because we fail in moments of weakness, which are inevitably going to come when you're trying to change something about yourself. It is going to happen. What do you do in those moments? And for every one of the 50 plus tools in the Mentally Strong Leader, I specifically spell out, based on experience and hard data, these are moments of weakness you can expect if you want to build this habit. Here's what to do about it when you experience that moment of weakness.
Yeah. As we wind down here, I do have a question that's a little change of subject here, but talk about our new world. So, how does a guy live in San Diego, but he's on the faculty at Indiana University? So do you travel back and forth a lot, or do you do a lot
But
virtually?
I'm in reserve for them now, and most
Okay.
of what I would do would be virtual for them in the future. If
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
I get called into action. But yeah, it's a good question. I get that one a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in anticipation of our discussion today, is there anything that I haven't asked you or we haven't covered that you want to be sure and get in the program?
Steve, I just wanted your listeners to understand that you know I hope they understand that my experience and the data is clearly pointing to mental strength becoming and being the next EQ, only
Yeah.
even more empowering. And it is the leadership superpower of our times. I hope they take that away. At the same time, it's important to me that they don't feel intimidated, because it is hard to become mentally strong and stay mentally strong. But they don't have to be intimidated. If you start with understanding what is your baseline, take the mental strength self-assessment, know that there's no right answer, everyone's journey is individual, and embrace it with the habits and the tools that are at your disposal, you can become measurably mentally stronger over time. And Steve, I have my clients retake the assessment after 3 months, after 6 months, and the improvement in their mental strength is remarkable. And the impact on achievement is undeniable, just based on the research alone that I've put behind this. And I hope everyone feels like it's attainable for them too to become mentally stronger, because it is.
Yeah, and I think that, just that mentally strong framework you're talking about, I think the piece that I think is getting more traction now is the right brain stuff.
Yeah.
Again, we started talking about Daniel Pink, and so I'll end with Daniel Pink too. Is that we had a discussion, and he felt that a lot of CEOs and a lot of leaders in the last few decades have been a lot of left brain thinkers, and that more right brain thinkers are coming into positions now of that. And he says it's sometimes, as we discussed earlier, messier and tougher, but yet people want to they embrace, or they get drawn to right brain thinkers more than the left brain thinker who's just about spreadsheets and facts and numbers and whatever. So I think becoming mentally strong, as you say in your book, developing those right brain pieces is real important as well.
Yeah, I think so. And if you need any proof of that, just look at the world in which we operate in today. Like I said earlier, it's not going to get any easier, Steve, in terms
Yeah.
of having to come through adversity and setbacks and doubt, self-doubt, and engagements with factions that are having a hard time listening to and understanding each other. It's not going to get any easier. So the need for mental strength
Yeah.
is only going to continue to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Scott, at this point in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question. And so that question is, in relation to leadership, What is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
Chase authenticity, not approval. If I have one thing that I've seen in my career, there are people go wrong as they begin to chase approval from their bosses, from their peers, and it causes you to lose sight of who you are. And it's an insatiable beast. When you're chasing approval, even if you achieve it, it's an empty victory at best and an elusive one. And by the way, it's a soul crushing endeavor at worst. So I really encourage people to chase authenticity, staying close to who you are, not chase approval.
Yeah, well said, well said. Well, Scott, this has been a real pleasure. The book is fantastic. I'd recommend it to anyone who's listening, and it gives a good practical approach to sometimes an abstract topic. So I thought it was well done, and you've structured it in a way that's very practical and makes sense. So thanks for your time today. Sounds like you're doing fun things now and great things, and so keep that going, and maybe we'll see each other down the road sometime.
Sounds great, Steve. I also might I offer a gift to your listeners. Would that be okay?
Absolutely, absolutely.
If they're interested, if they would like a free 60-page PDF that includes the mental strength self-assessment that I was talking about
Okay.
and prompts for how to get the most out of the book, The Mentally Strong Leader, they just go to scottmautz.com/mentally strong gift, and they can download that 60-page PDF for free.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, thank you for that offer, and thanks again for your time today. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you down the road.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Okay, take care. Bye bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.